Hello everyone, and welcome to this tutorial. My name's Emilio, and today I'll walk you through creating a customer self-service app using Glide. First, let's talk about Glide. Glide is a powerful no-code platform that allows you to create apps using Google Sheets or Excel. It's intuitive and lets you design and build fully functional mobile and web apps without writing a single line of code. Now, why choose Glide over traditional code-based options? Glide significantly reduces the time and effort required to develop an app. You don't need to learn complex programming languages or frameworks. Instead, you can focus on designing your app's functionality and user experience. Plus, Glide automatically handles the backend infrastructure, so you don't have to worry about server management or database integration. When it comes to creating a customer self-service app, there are numerous benefits. It empowers your customers to find answers to their questions, submit requests, and track the status of their cases independently. It reduces the workload on your support team and enhances customer satisfaction by providing them with quick and easy access to information and services. Here's a diagram of what the data flow looks like in our customer self-service app that we'll be building today. Customers will interact with the app to create and view cases, and they'll also add notes or comments to those cases. The data will be stored within Glide, and we'll be able to check this out in just a minute. Now, before we dive in, I'd like to note that as of this recording, I'm not affiliated with Glide, and the information included in this video are notes from my own experiences, and it's intended for educational purposes only. So let's begin by creating our first app. So let's log into Glide. And on our apps page, let's go ahead and create a new app. Here, we'll type in the name of our app. We'll call it Customer Self-Service. We'll choose the mobile layout. We can always change into large screen later on, but for right now, we'll choose mobile. For this exercise, we will choose Glide Tables as our data store. So select this and choose Create App. As we can see, we've now landed in the layout section of Glide. So from here, let's make some changes to our data model that matches what we discussed earlier. So by default, we have three tables: items, categories, and users. And in this particular instance, we actually want to create a handful of new tables for our specific use case. So in this scenario, we'll click on the plus icon here, choose blank table. This will be the table for our cases or our customer requests. And we're going to create three fields: subject, description, and user ID. And we'll also have one extra field for the unique identifier. So select here, type in row ID, and we'll make this a row ID type. This will make it a unique value for every single case that we create. The next field will be the subject. So we can just take the name field they gave us and put in subject. The third field will be description. And the last field will create a user ID. So now we can see we've got row ID, subject, description, user ID. Now let's change the name of our table to cases. So now we have our first table. Now we need to create the next table, which would be for our customer notes. So now we'll go back to the tables menu, choose blank table. And in this table, we'll have a handful of additional fields. So just like we did before, we'll create one column for our unique row ID. We will reuse the name field for our comments. We'll also want to add an additional field for user ID and one more field for case ID. That way we can link this note to the parent case it's tied to. Now let's move to the layout section. So when we get to our layout section, you'll notice that we have navigation for items and categories. We're going to hide these two and replace them with their cases and notes. To do that, we can select the icon here, the little eye next to each of these, and then we'll check the menu to create screen from data and select cases. So it represents the first series of tables that we created earlier. So now let's create a form that will allow us to create new cases and add them to the database. So here on the plus icon, this would be to create a new case. We'll select this. And as we can see, it pops open with 3 fields: subject, description, and user ID. One thing we need to do is go back to data. And on the users table, we need to add one more field so we can pull in. By default, Glide won't give you a user ID. However, we can add a unique value for the user by adding a row ID here, and then we can pass that along for every record that gets created. We can tag that record to that user. So we'll add as we did before, row ID. Now we've got this unique value that shows up here. So on cases, we now have the ability to add new cases. But before we do so, we actually need to change the layout so that we can capture information specific to the new cases we're going to create. To do this, we'll select the plus icon. That opens up with the add item form. This gives us the subject and the description. And what we also need to do is make sure that when this case gets created, we want to map values for this user who is tied to this record. So we'll populate a new field, and this could be from values from the user profile. So in this case, we'll have the row ID. And what we want to do is populate and map to this record. What that would allow us to do is every time a customer added a brand new case to your database, it will be linked to them. So that will make sure that other users won't see any cases that anyone else is creating. It keeps things secure. So we have our subject mapped, our description, and our row ID from the user table, all populated behind the scenes. So now we have our first layout set up. So now we can test this out by entering test case and test case. We submit it. And if we want to change how this looks, we'll change this to a list view or a table view. Depends on how you want to see it. I usually like to see a list. And in this instance, we want to have both maybe a subject and description, and we'll take out any additional values here. In this case, we might not have a URL for the actual image of the case. So we'll go ahead and just switch that out there. And you'll see that we have our case and we have a blank value up top. And if you ever notice this, that's just because you have a blank record. So we'll select our data. We'll delete this. And now that'll clean it all up. So the next step is, now that we have a case added, remember we had notes or comments that we would like to add associated with that case. So now let's select the case. Now that we're on this case, we need to add a new section for adding new notes. So here we'll select the components, and this is where we'll add in a collection for lists. So now we have a collection, and by default, it goes to the object that we might be currently on, or the current table. What we want to do is switch this, and we'll go back to our data, update this to say notes. So in our layout, as you can see, it's updated to notes. We want to switch this to be notes here. And now we want to do the same thing we did before, which is creating a form to allow the user to add their notes to the case. So we'll click on the plus icon. You'll see we have comments, user ID, case ID. Now, all we really need to add here is the actual comments. So we'll update this text section to be a little bit bigger, because comments usually have a lot of information. And now we have 2 additional fields that we don't necessarily need to show the user. We want that to get populated behind the scenes. So what we'll do is get the ID from the case, and we want the user that's also on that same case. So what we'll do here is get values from the user profile, which is the row ID. That way we can map it to the user. And then we also want to get the row ID from the actual case that we're on. So we'll select that here. As we can see, we've got these two mappings. So far, row ID is mapped to comments. We'll switch that to be the case. And the second one was the row ID that we got from the user. So then we can get rid of those two. Now, just in case, we'll go back and do this one more time, and we'll even just do this for myself. So to make sure that we're getting the ID from the case, we'll say, if I want a value from the screen, that's the case record. I want to select this, make sure that is coming in from the case, and let's double check that is going to the case ID mapping. The second one is a value we want to get from the user profile. That's this value, and we want to map that value to the user ID. So now we know those two are tied to this particular case. And now that we have this mapped, let's go ahead and test this out and submit. What we want to do is look at the data. And on this, we can see we've got the note, we have the description, and we have the user ID plugged in here. And then under notes, we have the comment, the user ID, the case ID. And as we did before, we have a blank value here. Let's go ahead and delete this. So now, whenever we come back to our layout, we have notes. Now, what we can also do is as we create another note, say test note number 2, as we save this, we'll add this here. But if we go and create another case, a completely separate one, as we can see, we have one additional thing to map here. So because we're on this case, let's update this form to pull values from the user profile, as we did before, the row ID. But we want to map that value to the user ID, and we'll get rid of this additional field here. And under our description, we'll make this bigger. So we have test case number 2. This is another test. So we'll save this. And now we have our second test, but let's open this up. Now remember, in this instance, we didn't create any new notes for this test case. However, we see the notes we created before for the first one. So the way that we can do this and filter these values is on this collection. We'll go over to our options. What we need to do is filter the data. And this would allow us to filter the notes that we have specific to this case to only show up on the case that they're created and mapped to. We don't want notes that are created from other cases getting mixed up here. So we'll go to filter data. And on this, we're saying for any of the notes that we are currently looking at, I only want the notes where the case ID is linked to the current case screen. It's the row ID here. So once we do that, then you'll notice that all of those notes that were there no longer appear. We also want to make sure that on the particular case, we see the subject, but the fields, we don't see any additional values here. So we might want to add the actual description. That way you can see additional details for that particular case. And now we can add an additional note for this case here, and we submit. So now you can see notes specific to cases. So we've got 2 actions. We create cases, and we can also add notes to those cases, and we can filter to only show notes specific to that particular case. And that's it. Now you've created a basic customer self-service app using Glide. In our next video, we'll take it a step further by integrating this app with Salesforce CRM using make.com. I hope you found this video helpful. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Please stay tuned for more additional tutorials and tips. And thank you for watching.